So welcome back to the Revit project tutorials. Now in this particular tutorial we'll be looking at creating a 3D site model using the topographic surfacing. Now it is very important that you have your survey drawing imported into your model correctly and the true north rotated before you start. Now let's quickly have a look at our site before we begin. Now here's our site here, and it's covered with trees around the edge. There is a two-story building right next to it and a three-story building and a two-story building on the east side, I think. Now on the south side there is a main street which is mainly a commercial strip, and there are two-story to three-story buildings on the south side of that road. On the back there's a smaller road and it's got medium density developments to the north side of that road. So the first thing you'll need to do is really familiarize yourself with the site because you will be designing your own building on it. Now we're ready to create a topographic surface for our site model. Now to create a topographic surface, all we need are the contour lines of the survey drawing, which are the red lines that you see on the screen, and maybe the contour labels as well, so we know what the elevation is for each contour line. So the first thing we need to do is turn off all the layers of the survey drawing, so we see just the contour lines, and you can do that by going up to the View tab. And in the graphics panel, you'll see, if you just hover over each of the tools, you'll see an option called Visibility Graphics. Click on that. Now in the subsequent box that comes up, you'll see a series of layers that are associated with the model file that you're in. Now eventually you'll have building elements on these layers. Now we want the layers of the survey drawing, so hop over to the Imported Categories tab and you'll see the survey drawing here and all the layers inside that survey drawing. Now we only want the contour label and the contour lines, so you need to turn all of them off except for those two layers. Like so. And you'll see in your drawing area just the contour lines and of course the contour labels. So let's start creating our topographic surface. Now the tool that we'll use for that is called the Topo Surface tool. So Revit refers to the surfacing process as topo surfacing, and you can locate that in the Massing and Site tab, and here it is, Topo Surface. Click on that. A contextual tab will actually appear, and same will an options bar. Now you can create a topo surface in a number of ways. We're going to use a point-by-point method for creating our topo surface. Now notice our contour lines, our entire drawing area is actually faded. This is actually called the sketch mode. It's a very specific mode that allows us to create either surfaces or planes or shapes before we generate the element that it's supposed to be. So in this case the element is the surface itself. So you can see it as more like an edit mode, which allows you to edit before the creation. Now up here in the tools panel, and you might have something a little bit different, mine's a lower resolution, we need to find the place point method, which is the method we'll be using to create our topo surface. Click on that, and before you specify a point on the drawing area, go over to the options bar, and in the elevation change that to 6,000. And the reason why we need to change that to 6,000 is that the first contour line that we're focusing on, which is this one, actually has an elevation of 6 meters. So we want every point on this particular contour line to be lifted by 6 meters, which in this case is 6,000 millimeters. Okay, so let's start. Move over to the edge of that contour line, make sure it's 6 meters, and snap to the end point of that. And then just following that line, you might want to find each midpoint and each end point, making sure you're not snapping to the text of each part of that contour line. It doesn't have to be very close together. So if the lines are really long, I would click on the midpoint and the end point. If it's really short like this section here, then you just need the end points, like so. Midpoint, end point. Now if this happens, you can still hover your mouse over and it will highlight the line underneath it for you. Now if it's too hard to see, go down to the control bar, which is down here, find the visual style and change it to wireframe. So you can do that on the fly, and that will show you the lines underneath that surface, and you can continue just clicking on each point on that contour line until it's finished, like so. Now once you've finished, you can click the finished surface and have a look. It doesn't look like much at the moment, but if you go to the 3D view, which isn't actually listed here, so I need to go to view 3D view for that. And here's our surface. It looks a little bit flat at the moment because it's all the same elevation. Now we need to actually finish off that surface, so we've only done one contour line and just the top part of that surface, so we need to continue, and you can continue by just selecting the surface and going up to edit surface. You need to go into the plan view to make it a little bit easier. So we're back into that edit mode again, and you can enter the edit mode at any time by selecting an element and editing it. So now we can continue with the same method of place point. This time we're stepping down the contours by half a meter, so now it's 5.5 meters. So I need to change that to 1500 there. Make sure you get that right, otherwise your surface might look a little strange. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. Now I'm using the scroll on the mouse to scroll in and out dynamically, and if you want to pan, you can just use the middle button to pan across. So it doesn't matter what point you select, as long as it's reasonably close together. Like so. Now you can either finish and have a look or just continue. I'm just going to continue so I don't waste time. So changing the elevation again and moving on to the next one. It is a little bit tedious, but it does give you a lot of flexibility on how you shape your topo surface. So here's something I created a little bit earlier. Now bear in mind that the contours at the end step down by 1/2 meter, so they don't have labels, but they do step down by 1/2 meter. I'm just going to quickly do this last one. I've forgotten to actually do it. Now if you want to know how high a particular point is, you can always press the modify button and then click on one of the points and it will tell you the elevation is 4 meters. So this must be 3.5. So I can just quickly finish this off by 3.5 and specify those points like so. So here's my surface. Click on the finish surface to actually finish it off, and into the 3D view, which should be there now, and there's my lovely surface. Now the contours are still quite far apart visually, so I'm going to tighten it up so that I can see more intermediate contours in between the ones that I already have. And you can do that by going into massing and site, and under the model site panel click on the arrow that we mentioned a lot earlier in the very first tutorial. Now this will open up the site settings. Now what we're after are the interviews of the contour line display, so I want to see more contour lines, and at the moment it's at intervals of 5 meters, so you see that black one there and everything else you see in grey. Now if I change that to 500, so that's every 1/2 meter, and press apply, you can see in the background that it's increased. I'm going to change that to 250 so it's a little bit tighter, like so. Okay. Now you can change the shading to something shaded so you can see what the site looks like. Now before we move on to the building process, we're just going to clean this topo surface up a little bit. So let's move back into the site level, and what we're going to do is split this surface and clean up those jagged edges so it's nice and straight. Now we may need to extend this corner out so we can actually split it properly. So the first thing you need to do is to select the surface and edit the surface. Now at this point I want to see the outlines of the curb, the streets, so I can see where I need to split and what I need to clean up. So once again, go back into View, Visibility Graphics. Now the shortcut for that is just VG on the keyboard. Go back into Imported Categories, so there's our survey drawing, and I'm just going to turn on Curb. So if you can't see it, change to wireframe, and you should be able to see it underneath that surface. So here are the lines of my street, so I know that I want to cut it along the edge of where the curb actually stops. Now at this corner, I'm just going to grab one of these points and drag it out, like so. So it goes beyond. If you were to draw an imaginary line down here and here, it goes beyond that corner. Alternatively, you can just put in another contour line. So if you like, you can just place point, find out what elevation this is first, so that's 3.5 meters. So place point, and I'm going to change this to 3 meters, and it'll be out here somewhere, like that. So now I know at least it overlaps where I want to cut that off. And you can just follow the edges and make sure that's okay. Same with this one. You can just pull it out so that it covers the edge that I will eventually cut to. So don't pull it out too much. Might want to just pull it out a little bit. Like so. And then finish surface. So now you have a slightly bigger surface. Now what we will do is to tidy up the edges of this surface so it's nice and straight. And we do that by using the split surface tool, which is in the massing and site tab and in the modify site panel. And there's a split surface tool. If you click on it and then click on the surface, we'll go into an edit mode once again, but it's slightly different edit mode. We're in a split surface tool now rather than a topo surface tool. Now at this point you need to determine where you will split this surface. So I want to split this large surface into two surfaces. The one on the inside, which represents my cleaned up topo surface, and the superfluous edges on the outside. And we do that by just drawing a box that defines the edges of where we want to cut this surface. So if you go up to the draw panel, and we'll just use the line tool at the moment, so it's a line method, we can snap to the end of one of these curved lines and just pull down past the surface until it's straight. And we can do that to the bottom one. And we can pick a random line here, so we can actually not snap to any line and just randomly draw a line that slices through that surface, and the same up here. Now these lines are what we call sketch lines, and they're usually in a pinkish purple color. Every time you draw a profile or a shape in this edit mode, it has to be closed and it can't overlap. So at this point we need to clean up gaps like this and overlaps like this. And we do that by using the modify tools on top. So if I click on modify, that will clear me out of this drawing mode, and then I can just choose things like trimming tools, which will, if I select one line and then the other line, will trim that corner for me, and same with here. Be careful that you select the right side of the line. So if I select this line and then this bottom edge of the line, it will trim to that corner and not the other one, which is not what we want. So let's undo that. You can undo things by pressing Ctrl Z. So let's trim that properly and trim this one so there's no overlapping. So now we have a nice clean closed border to cut through this surface. So we have an inside surface and an outside surface. So let's finish this split surface tool. Now if you pop into 3D mode, here we go, and here's our surface, and you can see very clearly as you hover your mouse over each surface there is an outside surface and an inside surface. So you can click on it and it will highlight in blue. At this point you can just select the outside edges and delete them. All we need is a cleaned up inside surface. Now last but definitely not least, and you'll be going into materiality quite a lot, we're going to change the material of this. So if you select that surface over in the properties palette, it has no material at the moment, it's just a shading, so there's no materials associated with this surface. We're going to associate an earth material to it, so it is made out of earth. Now this will impact a lot of things, especially when you generate 2D drawings. It will automatically hatch the earth hatching for you. So it is important that you start associating appropriate materials to each of your elements. Now in the properties palette, in the materials field, click in the by category text, and right next to it you'll see a little grey button with 3 dots in it. So just click on that grey box and you'll get a window. Mine's a little bit big for the screen. I'll pull it down. You'll get a window called materials. Now you don't need to do much with this. We'll expand on this a little bit later. All you need to do for this moment in time is to scroll down and find the site category and a material called earth. Now I'll just bring this up a little bit. You can see that there's a cut pattern attached to it, and it's the standard cut pattern that you would see on 2D drawings that would represent Earth. So we'll go into that in further depth further down the line in the 2D drawing stage. For the moment, just press OK. Click outside and you'll see that your surface is now brown. Now if you change the shading to realistic, you'll see a darker brown. Nothing too exciting, but if you go into our section view, and I'm just going to double click a section view, you can see that the section line runs straight through our site, and it's actually hatched what's underneath it. So it's picked up the cut patterns that we pointed out earlier on in the materials box, which is why it's important to define your materials very early on in the modeling stage. It does make a big difference and saves you a lot of time down the line where you have to backtrack and actually add materials to elements. Now that ends tutorial 1C, but we haven't completed the entire set 1 yet. There is one more to go, and that deals with laying building pads which will either excavate or fill our site ready for our building. It is an urban site, so there is a lot of hard surfaces, so we will need to establish the roads and the foundations before we even start building.